Let's start programming language virtual machine. What is programming language virtual machine? These are the virtual machine which typically aim to provide a portable runtime environment for specific programming language. So you might have heard of JVM, Java Virtual Machine, yeah, or DVM, Dalvik Virtual Machine, etc. So what is the role of such programming language virtual machine? So actually they are there to provide a portable runtime environment. Okay, independent of what is the underlying hardware, you can have your program executed in a virtual machine which is specific to that programming language, right? Now running the code through this specially programmed virtual machine will actually help us to achieve cross platform compatibility, because when the entire program will actually run into the virtual machine which is specifically designed for that programming language. So irrespective of the underlying hardware, right, you can build your program without having even any knowledge of what is the underlying hardware. You can make a program, compile a program. The compiled code is in the form of some intermediate code which is also known as bytecode. Now the job of this programming language virtual machine is to convert the bytecode, translate it into machine instruction, right? So this is the job of JVM or any programming language virtual machine. So if we are working with a programming language specific virtual machine, what happens is whenever you compile the code, for example, when you compile Python code, in the code, it will get compiled into bytecodes. For example, if you execute Python program will be compiled into some intermediate code. uh, we can call it as a bytecode. Now this bytecode is in PYC form files, okay, Python compiled files. So whenever we run it on JVM, or not JVM, whenever we execute it, right? Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. So let's take an example of Python code. Python code is compiled into a simpler format called bytecode. Now this bytecode is actually stored in PYC files, right? Python compiled files. And whenever you execute the program, what happened, the virtual machine, this programming language specific virtual machine, takes the bytecode and then translate it into the machine instruction. Okay, so in that sense it provides cross platform compatibility. Okay, second advantage of having the programming language specific virtual machine is to check the code for safety, both at the compile time and at the runtime. So suppose if you are executing a malicious program, the effect of that maliciousness is only specific or limited to the virtual machine. It will not go beyond that. Okay, so it will not going to hamper your system or adversarially affect your system. So that is another advantage of having this programming language specific virtual machine, right? A few of the examples are JVM, DVM, Microsoft CLR, etc. Okay. Now, so if we talk about the benefits, we have seen it provides platform independence. It isolates the program from the hardware detail. Okay, so you can write a program very simply without even thinking of what is the underlying hardware. It simplifies application code migration across physical platforms. It is quite easy to migrate your or port your code from one machine to another machine, because sometimes there are some softwares. So the company is using a specific type of hardware, and later on they will change their entire infrastructure in the sense of hardware. There is no need to change the code. You can use the same applications. Everything is same on the newer infrastructure. It also supports dynamic downloading of software. Okay. So it may be, so since the compiled code is in the form of bytecode, what we can do is we can call this program at the runtime also. Dynamically calling of the program is also possible, because if you see C, etc., you have to compile the code each and every time, which is not true in this cases, right? The compiled code is already there. You just have to take it and execute it. Okay. So this particular virtual machines also hide the complexity of legacy system, the older systems which we have. Many interesting programming language and systems are built around these virtual machines, right? So these are the benefit of programming language virtual machine. Now let me tell you what is the effect of untrusted code. So suppose if you are having an untrusted code, right, what they can do is they can actually mainly hamper your memory reasons, which is a very important part. So memory regions are hampered. So there could be a read operation, there could be a write operation, there could be a jump operation on some sensitive memory regions. Okay. So untrusted code can read your sensitive memory areas where you have stored password, where you have stored cryptographic keys, where you have stored database records. Untrusted code can write in the memory locations where it is not supposed to write, or it may violate the integrity. For example, if you stored somebody's public verification key in the memory, if the untrusted code override that public key, then the entire integrity will be violated, right? Similarly, jump operation, jumping to an arbitrary location is also difficult. Jump some untrusted code can bypass access control mechanism, through jumping to a particular location, right? So apart from this, yes, they can call arbitrary system calls, which they are not allowed to do. They can have denial of service attack. They can consume memory, computational power, network bandwidth, etc. They can crash operating system. They can crash programs. They can crash systems. Anything they can do. But the most important, or you can say relevant effect that we can see is read, write, and jump operation. How can we protect these three things, like, or in abstraction I can say, how can we protect our memory from tampering through these untrusted code? So there could be quite a solution. So one solution is, just have a separate process or separate virtual machine for each and every untrusted code. Okay. So what you can do is you can run untrusted code in separate processes. So suppose there is an application, okay, and that application have many untrusted codes. Let's say three untrusted codes are there. So you have to create four virtual machines to execute the same application, because at some part you will, at some virtual machine you will execute that the trusted code, and you have to create three more virtual machines for all the untrusted codes. The disadvantage of this is, see, advantage is simple, you have proper memory separation, and if something malicious is happen, it is only within that particular virtual system, right? Disadvantage is inter-process communication is too high, the cost is too high, it is very expensive. Okay, there is a lots and lots of this context switching overhead, because you are communicating between the virtual machines actually. Okay. Apart from this, untrusted code can have some system calls, they can gain privileges, etc. So these are the pros and cons of having separate processes to handle untrusted code. Let's see what are the other solution. Second solution could be, only accept code that is digitally signed by some trusted entity. Okay. So one of the example which is followed this particular solution is Microsoft ActiveX. Sorry, ActiveX, you might have heard of this. So what is ActiveX? ActiveX is a solution proposed by Microsoft of the signed code. People will submit their code, and ActiveX will sign their sign the code with their signature. So the advantage of this is security policies are very, very simple. You only have to check whether the given code is signed by ActiveX. If yes, go ahead, use it. If not, then don't use it, right? So in that sense, security policy is very simple. But the problem is you have to rely only, I mean, you have to rely on the security of this trusted third party, right? The secrecy of the private key of this party, the authenticity of the public key of the third party, etc. And you have a very much coarse grained access control. You cannot have a fine grained access control. I mean, you cannot see each and every memory location, what the code is actually doing, right? You can have an, eagle view of the code, that okay, this is what it is doing, and it assumes to be safe because it is signed by, tested by ActiveX. Okay, so this is definitely not a very good, option to go with. Third option is sandboxing. So in sandboxing, what we do is we create a limited environment, right? And this limited environment, we put a we put the untrusted code. Now this untrusted code. So suppose this is the untrusted code. We will create a sandbox around it. Means each and every system call which is called by this untrusted code, each and every memory references that are referred by this untrusted code will actually do something, like for example, it we is going to verify each and everything at every point because the code is untrusted, right? So this is a way of sandboxing. So we actually sandbox the untrusted code, and we cross check or verify each and every transaction in and out from this untrusted code. So the advantage is the control is very fine grained, right? You know what memory locations are accessed, you know which system call has been called, etc. The disadvantage is it is very, very less or low in efficiency, right? Because you have to put check on each and every instruction. Second, expressing security policy is also difficult because if I say that the particular program is accessing a memory location, it is very difficult to define that whether this memory location is valid or not valid. Okay, so in that sense, security policy defining is a difficult task if we are using sandboxing. And also, if the sandbox have its own vulnerabilities, then also we have to bear with that. It may be possible that some untrusted code can bypass that vulnerability of the sandbox and can have the security threat on the system. Okay. So to this particular problem, so specifically to deal with untrusted code, the solution which was mostly used is called software fault isolation. And again, this is another type of virtualization, and that is why we are covering it in this particular unit. Okay. So basically, software fault isolation actually provide memory safety very efficiently, right? So if you remember, we want to handle read, write, and jump operation on the memory location. So memory safety is provided very efficiently by SFI. And the goal here is we will allow the read write operation only to the legitimate memory location. Okay, so this is the overall goal of the software. Okay, now what this particular software will do, it will transform untrusted code into a safe code. Okay, so if you see this particular diagram, the job of SFI software is to take a program P which may or may not satisfy security policy and convert this program into another program called P dash, which guaranteed to satisfy security policy of interest. Okay, so this is what done by SFI software, right? And how can we do that? So basically, it is a two-step process. First, compiler will generate the safe code. We will see how the safe code has been generated, and then the loader will actually rewrite the untrusted code with the safe code which is generated by the compiler. Okay, so in that sense, it is a two-step process. So let's see, how actually it works. So basically, the SFI works in. So basically, the goals are defined like that. So okay, so first let me tell you how it works. What will happen in SFI? We have a memory segment. Okay, We have some memory addresses, and now this memory portion is divided into fixed size segment. Okay, and these segments are called fault domains. Fault domains. Fault domain 1, fault domain 2. Okay, so they have their some segment number. Okay, and these are called fault domains. These segments are called fault domains. Now, what is the goal? One more thing, along with the fault domain, we also divide it into code part and the data part. Okay, so to each untrusted code, one fault domain has been assigned, and the code of that untrusted code is written at one place, and the data part is written into another part. Okay, so this is how it works, and the goal is to that code is only in the read-only part. Okay, so some of the part of this segment, or you can call it as logical fault domain (LFD). So some part of this LFD is read-only part, and there you will going to store the code of the program. So there no write in the code part is allowed during the runtime. Second is module can read and write anything within the fault domain. Since this is under our control, we know. So if we say, okay, this is the memory location I am assigning to the untrusted code, then we will say that, okay, untrusted code, you can do whatever you want to do, but just remain within these boundaries. Don't go beyond these boundaries. Okay, something like that. And also code can be jumped only within that fault domain, which is assigned to it. Okay, so we can broadly say that the entire process of software fault isolation is divided into two parts. First is the efficient software encapsulation, where we actually put this data into LFDs, and then we need some fast communication across these fault domains, right? Okay, so let's see these two one by one. So let's focus on efficient software encapsulation. How to do software encapsulation? Now, the goal of software encapsulation is to allow writes only within the data part of the fault domain. Okay, no write is allowed in the code part. Only allow jump within the code segment of the fault domain. Okay, so whenever there is a code, definitely you have to jump from one code to another. That jump also should happen only within the fault domain. Okay, and the mechanism is, as we discussed, split the memory space into segment. Each segment has some segment identifier. Okay, so the diagram, we can call this as 0001. Okay, 1011, etc. And then we have some lower bits number which will actually have the address, contain the address of each and every memory location. Okay, right. So we split it. Segment identifier is there, separate code and data segment, and then we should have few dedicated registers which will which will act as an invariant of this. So we will have few register whose value can be changed by SFI software, but not by the untrusted code. So at any point in time, the value of these registers is will be safe only. Okay, and then we will tame unsafe instruction by segment matching or by address sandboxing. So we will going to see these two methods to tame unsafe instruction and convert it into a safe instruction. Okay, so let's take an example. So we take a single address space and partition it into called logical fault domain, as I told you, LFDs, right? So one single address space is partitioned into multiple logical segments. Now what we want to do is we want to enforce program which are in the LFD being isolated from reading or writing to the memory outside their LFD. If a particular LFD is allotted to a program to untrusted code one, suppose, now this code is allowed only to be read and write within these boundaries, not go beyond that. Okay, And we also need a cheap way to communicate between these LFDs, right? Okay. So the policy we want it as follows: that program can read and write memory within their LFD. This ensures secrecy and also the integrity of the memory, and jumps are also allowed within the LFD. Okay. Now let's say how can we do it. So suppose the LFD has address 03002003FF. Okay, and we are given a program, and suppose there is an instruction, say write x, right? Now what is write x? Write to a memory location x. Now if we want to implement those SFI constraints, what we can do is, suppose x is 0433. Suppose the value of x is this, but the assigned logical fault domain to this particular code is this. What we will do, we will check the value of x with the lower bound. If it is less than this, we will say error. If it is if it is greater than this, we will give error. Otherwise we will write it. So if it is somewhere here, we will write it, we will execute it. Are you getting my point? So each particular instruction is converted into 5 lines. Whenever there is a memory reference, we will check that whether this memory reference belongs to or within the boundary of assigned LFD or not. If not, there will be an error. If yes, then the program execute. Okay. Now, what is the problem with this? The problem is it is a 5 time code blow up. So each line you are actually converting one line into 5 lines, 100 into 500, so on and so forth. Okay. So it is too much in that sense, not very efficient, and the increase in the code size is also very high. So can we do any better? So people suggested that, so in this case we can have address like 0300200432. This is also a possible address space. Okay. So in this case, we will check with the lower bound and the upper bound. Here we check with 0432. Okay. So people say that, okay, don't give this arbitrary uh, logical fault domain addresses. What you can do is you can decide your own boundary. So suppose I will fix my fault domain. So 0100 to 01FF all belongs to a particular one fault domain, and whosoever lie in that fault domain, the higher order bit of that segment is 01. Okay. Now, can we do better? So see, previously we have to check with the upper bound and the lower bound both. Okay. Lower bound and upper bound both. Now what we can do, if we do our if we made our integral boundaries like this, we just need to check the higher bits. If the higher bit is within the range, then we have to proceed, otherwise no need to proceed. Okay. So in that sense, just to check the higher bits, we need only one comparison statement. Okay, and that too in this format. So what we will do, we have a temporary register. We will say, okay, so we have assumed the value of x is this, right? Okay. So they say what you can do is you can perform AND operation between 0433 and FF00. Now, if you perform AND, it will give you first two higher bits. Okay, that is 04. Now, if you can compare temp with 04, if it is within range, then go ahead and write whatever x is. Otherwise, there will be error. Okay, otherwise there will be error. So instead of checking lower boundary and upper boundary both and then decide, it is better to check the intermediate higher weights, because and do the allocation in that manner that each higher order bit correspond to one person, one fault, one LFD. Okay, right. So we have now decreased the code size with 4x. So 1x decrease is there. Okay. Also, if we talk about write, so if reads are handled properly, then in the same way, writes can be handled, right? So in that sense, there is no issue. Now the question arises, can we do any better? So here what we are doing segment matching. We are somehow just matching with the segment number. Okay, so if it is 04, then okay, otherwise not okay, something like that. Now let's come to another better way in which what we will do is see. So now everything is same. Value of x is 0433. Okay, value of temp is temporary variable is empty right now. So what we will do, we will perform x and 00ff operation. Now x and 004 0 what x and 00ff 00ff. Now what this will give us, this will give us the lower order bits. Okay, we'll do is so we have x equal to 0433 and right. Right. So what we can do is we can use a separate temporary register to transform this instruction, and we can do it a more bet in a more much more better way. So in the previous example, we have four instruction. Okay, so one instruction is converted to four instruction, and now if you see in this, one instruction is converted to three instructions. Now how? So we can use this three temporary register temp, and what we can do is, so we will assume our x is 0433. Okay, and suppose the valid address of LFD is 0300 to 03FF. Okay, so we want the program to execute only within these limits. So we can add our x and 00FF value. Okay, so this could call as mask value in order to get the lower order bits. Okay, so overall goal is to get this 33, and instead of whatever written here 04 anything written here, we will convert it to 03. Okay, so that this will lie within our LFD. Okay, so if you remember, the higher order bit represent the segment ID. Now what we want is, we want it to be this, we want the LFD to be this. Okay, so in this way we can convert the untrusted code into a trusted code. Right, trusted code means which can do read and write operation only within the LFD. Okay, so x, the value of x is 0403, and if we perform or operation, not or end operation with these, we will get 3300. Okay, and when we perform or operation, so this will going to first store in the temp value, and then when we perform the second line, that is 0 0033 is or with 0300 operation, then we get 0333. Okay, so we have converted 0433 to 0333. Okay, so in this way untrusted code can be converted into trusted code. Now can we still do better? Now the only problem with this is we have to use this temporary register, separate temporary register. Can we do better? Yes, we can do, right? We can replace the x only. Okay, but there is a problem attached with this particular thing. So let's see. So instead of using the temporary variable, we can replace x, right? So x, the value of initial value of x is 0433. Later on it will become, if you perform AND operation, it will become 0033, and when we execute this line, the value of x will become 00333. Okay, which is a safe, considered to be a safe. Now, the problem is, if we use this particular method, the value of x is something which is given by the programmer or the untrusted code. So the untrusted code can do anything with that. So if they know that each instruction is converted into 3-line instruction, they can bypass this scenario, right? So they can just do some tampering with the X. Later on, they can perform some operation on the X to change the value. So the solution to this is just go with the temporary register, use the temporary register as we have seen in the previous slide. Okay, and we can convert a single line instruction into 3-line instruction, right? Using the temporary variable. This process is known as sandboxing. We are actually, you know, making the system such that it will run only within the limited, or restricted environment. So this is called sandboxing. Okay. So this is another method of isolation. About jumps, right? So we have seen how to handle read and write. Now what about jumps? So basically in jump also what we need to do is we need to prevent jumps into regions that are outside the given LFD, right? So if you remember our example, suppose our the range or the given range of our LFD is 0300 to 03FF. What we want is, and that too in this code and data segment is there, we want jump to happen only in the code segment and that too within the range, right? And there will be no jumps in the middle of an SFI sequence, right? So it is not possible that you have created an SFI sequence and then there is in the middle there is a jump. Okay. Now, if you focus on jump, there are two types of jump instruction. One are direct jumps that will not create much problem because the direct memory address we are aware of, and hence we can convert that into the one which falls under our range, right? So as we did for write and read. Okay, so we easily inspect the address to ensure that it is in the correct LFD. But what about indirect jumps? Now, there are three kinds of indirect jump. One is a jump with, some arbitrary address. One is the call when you call a function and, suddenly your sequence will or your control will jump to a particular location depending upon what you have called or what the function called in the function in that program. And the third jump is return. So when the function is returning back, you are landing up to a unknown territory, right? So how to handle these type of jumps? So when we have jump R instruction, it means take R and jump to what it points to, right? So it can so this also can be handled in how we have handled write instructions. Why? Because we have to add the code that compare the branch or target address under consideration, right? So if it is says that you have to jump to location of R, what we can do, we can convert this R so that it will lie within the range of our LFD, right? So we have suffix marks and we have prefix mask. So when we are performing AND operation, what we want to do is we want to just capture the lower order bit. So the suffix will generally become 00FF kind of a thing so that we can get lower bits. And then later on, we can, somehow append the higher bits with whatever is the allowed LFD, right? So if the allowed LFD is suppose 0500 to 05FF, then we can have the value of prefix as 0500 so that it can append 05 here. Okay, so instead of x y let's say 33, the address is converted to 0533. Okay, this is our goal because that is the valid range of our LFD. Okay, so this is how we can handle jump, and for that matter we have used temporary register so that it is not manipulated by the code itself. Okay, so we have discussed this previously, so the same case applies here as well. Now whenever we have a call, okay, so at the runtime you know the address where to what to call. Okay, so that transformation call R transformation is quite similar. Okay, so you have to just convert this R into a relevant R. Okay, which lies within the range of your specific LFD. Now what about return statement? The return has to pop. So when you return, what is happening on the stack, on the memory stack, you actually have to pop the latest address which is at the top of the stack. Okay, and you have to go there at that location, right? This is what returns do. So we need to make sure that the address at the top of the stack is reasonable address, or is a valid address, is a safe address. Okay, so to do that, what we can do is we have an instruction is prefixed to the above jump transformation, right? So we will first see what is there at the top of the stack before jumping or branching to that location, and we will compare it, or somehow mask it to a relevant address. But the problem is, if you see our Intel architecture, we have a variable length instruction architecture, right? Length is not fixed. So when you are having any type of jump, it doesn't matter like you are returning, you're calling, or you're jumping, but whenever you're jumping to an arbitrary location which is not direct jump, which is an indirect jump, it may happen that this conversion may lead some problem. Okay, so what kind of problem? Let's see. The problem is, suppose there is an instruction which says move edx. Okay, and this is the corresponding hexadecimal code of move edx. Now this particular actually assembles with BA50CB3BC2. And when I have converted the code, okay, so actually what I am doing, so suppose I have to lend up to a location 0433, and at 0433 location it is written, it is somewhere here. When I converted the code into 0533, because 05 is my the LFD which I am using right now, if I will convert it in this manner, it may happen that it will end up somewhere here in the middle of the instruction, because the length of the instructions are variable. Okay, we are already keep on changing the code which is above it. So we may end up to an location which can execute something else, right? So if you see 50CB3BC2, and if we deassemble it, it is saying push EAX, return and compare and things like that. Okay, so you end up to execute something else. Instead of some benign operation, you are running some arbitrary operations, right? So in this instance, jumping to the middle of the original instruction means something else and something very different than the legitimate instruction, right? And this is due to variable length instruction representation which we are having, right? Now, so whenever we handle jump, there will be a problem. This kind of problem will always there. So what can be done now? It could be possible to branch into a middle of the instruction, which would then interpret it as an instruction to jump outside the LFD, right? So the solution to this particular problem is, we can have design predicates that are true for instruction boundaries. Okay, now we need some extra thing. We need some extra predicates to store what are the valid indirect call points, what are the valid indirect return points, and what are the valid indirect jump points. As discussed earlier, direct jumps does not create this problem, but there is a problem with indirect jumps, because at the runtime you are converting that particular thing. So what we can do is this: we can have a list of all the valid indirect call points, and whenever the conversion was done, we will check whether this converted value lies within the range of the valid indirect call points or not. Right, same for return pointer, same for jump points. Okay, so we augment the SFI sequence for a jump with a check to make sure that the target address is to control point we know about. It should be a valid, legitimate instruction point. Okay, and this is how we can somehow manage to have or to convert the untrusted code into safe code, along with jump operation, indirect jump operation, that are converted into, when there is another check which we have to put in indirect jumps. Okay, so for example, jump R now becomes, so you first you have to push R. Okay, Then you have to call the predicate to check whether R is a control point, and then you have to perform a jump operation. Okay, so you have converted R into some address which is valid address. You have to check that whether that valid address is a right control point or not. Okay, so this is what we can jump with. We can do with the jumps, right? Okay. Now, so since we are talking a lot about programming language virtual machine, now let's have a look that what could be the system level issues that can faced by programming language virtual machines, right? So the first problem that I would like to mention here is when we have multiple LFDs in a single address space, it might correspond to multiple programs and as with address spaces. So it is necessary to support the communication between these LFDs. Okay. So local procedure call don't work because we need to preserve the sanctity of the registers temp and ctemp. Okay. So we need some sort of support of inter LFD call, without the intervention of an operating system. So this is the first issue that we need to face, okay, or we need to handle basically. Second is program running in the LFD will likely require operating or kernel services, and but we are not allowing it to access the direct, we are not allowing the direct access to the kernel, right? Because we know that inside this LFD we are actually having our untrusted code. Okay, or we can say that we have to somehow restrict the code to lie only in the within the LFD regions. Okay, so now if the some part of the code into that LFD would like to access system resources, what to do in that case? So what we have to do is we have to modify kernel services so that it can support individual LFD. Okay, so that we can make accountable that this is called by which LFD. So we need kernel service support at this particular point. Okay, and this may involve that we have to create multiple instances of the resources. We have to change the granularity level of the resources at kernel level. We have to add few more kernel operations, right? So basically, if we are using LFD, we are, you know we need kernel support as well for some or the other reasons, right? Okay, so this is one solution, that you can just modify the kernel and have all these extra features into it so that it can support kernel services as well. Second solution is known as veneer or stub. Now, what do you mean by veneer or stub? It actually allow inter LFD communication, right? So basically, suppose these are two LFDs. What we may have some sort of stub, call stub or something like that. So whenever there is a call, so we actually would like to access kernel services. Whenever we have a call, that particular call is via that particular stub. Okay, so this effectively places a wrapper around the kernel operation to ensure safety, right? So now it is the duty of the code which is written here to check all the kernel related operations, or to manage all the kernel level operations, right? So these are the two system level issues that we have to handle in when we are using LFDs. One is somehow we need some sort of inter LFD support, inter LFD communication support, so that we can save or restore the value of temp and ctemp register as and when required. Second, if the code which is written inside the LFD would like to use kernel level services, we need to have some kind of veneer or stub to handle or manage those operations, right? What are the other issues? So the other issues which are associated with SFI transformation is when we are actually transforming the code, untrusted code, into safe code. Are we sure that we are preserving the properties of the original program, or we are changing the original program entirely? Okay. Now the problem is how to define that whether we are preserving these properties or not. See, since we are actually transform the program, and it may be possible that it is not preserving all the properties. Okay, So because the number of instructions are changing, number of locations which it actually access is changing. So you are doing a lots and lots of changes. So are we sure, or can we have some guarantee that the properties of the original program are preserved? Okay. So for that matter of fact, what we can do is we can use library routine to, circumvent this type of amplified transformation. So instead of having you know things within, or untrusted code, relying entirely on untrusted code, it is better to have library routines which are, I mean, commonly trusted, or you have some community trust at least with those libraries, right? So basically, the goal is to prevent programs from invoking library routines that have not been SFI'd. There are some other issues apart from the system level issues that we need to take care of. So basically, when we do SFI transformation, somehow we need to preserve some properties of the original program. Okay. So the problem is how to define the properties, how to define that the properties are preserved. Okay, definitely it will not preserve, it will not going to preserve all the properties. Why? Because we are actually changing a lot many things in the code. So instead of one sentence, now we are writing three instructions, right? Instead of actual address, or actual memory location that the program wants to access, we are actually converting that location into some other location. Okay. So we cannot say that we can preserve all the properties, but somehow how can we precisely define that how many properties are being preserved? So this is one thing. Second is, so whenever you are doing library call within the SFI, now what to do? Okay, so you have converted the, so write X is converted, read X is converted, jump operation are also converted. What about library routines? So whenever there is a library routine call, what you will do? Okay, so somehow we need to prevent, the code which is written into SFI to invoke library routines. Or even if the program wants to access a library call, we need to make sure that that particular library code should also be in some of the SFI. Okay, so we need one LFD, that could acquire a shared log and then never relinquish it. It could be possible, right? So to avoid this, so that the program which is written in the LFT will not do so, what we can do is we can have, to protect or prevent the programs from invoking library routines that are not under control. Okay, because those library could fire a attack like denial of service, etc., on the LFD. Okay, so these are few other issues. So this is a emerging field, so research is still going on. So let me give you a practical example of a software which actually use SFI, software fault isolation. Okay, so we are learning a lot about software fault isolation now. You may ask that whether there is a practical tool or whether somebody is using it. So the answer is yes. Native client of Google is actually using it. What is native client? Native client is a sandbox, which is a browser, add-on, or you can say a browser, extension or capability of providing a sandbox environment so that the web code can execute C++ code, okay, efficiently and securely, right? So this is a browser extension. Native client is a browser extension which comes with Google Chrome browser. Okay, and definitely, native client brings the performance and low level control of the native code to modern browser without sacrificing security and portability of the web. Definitely, C++ are much programs written in C++ are much more faster than the programs written in Java or any other interpreted languages. So the goal of native client is to provide a sandboxed environment so that the web browser can execute C++ code along with maintaining the security and portability issues, right? Because when we say C++, then there are portability issues, right? It could be, it will be dependent upon the underlying hardware and softwares that are there in the system. Okay. So native client use XFI technique to provide portability and security along with the performance gain, by this by running C++ code. So let's see how it works. Okay, so the goal of native client is does not execute any disallowed instruction. Okay, so we have to provide the security also. So the first goal is do not execute any disallowed instruction. Now, what do we mean by disallowed instruction? So there are some system calls which are very specific, and it could be run only in the or by this by some authorized user, and even actually this the C++ code does not allow to do so. Okay, so ensure module does not perform any system call. This is the first goal. Second goal is does not access memory or execute code outside the module boundary. If you remember SFI, we create a domain, fault domain, right? Software fault domain or logical fault domain boundary. So in native client, they ensure that this boundary is well maintained, and ensure module does not corrupt service runtime data structure. So there is some runtime data structure which is sanitized, it is not corrupted by any external code. It ensures that module does not jump into the service run code, also known as return to libc, right? Because there is a famous attack called return to libc, when you are using C++. So to maintain that security, module make sure that it will not do so. And the module code plus data live within 0 to 256 MB virtual address, right? So the address is still 0 to 256 MB, and the code part and the data part lives within this range, right? As we did in SFI. Now, everything else should be protected from access by native client module. Okay? So, native client only allowed to access this much memory area, and that too in a restrictive fashion, like no system calls allowed, no library routine allowed, etc., etc. Right? So, in this restrictive environment, they provide the C++ code to execute in the web browser. Okay, so this is what a practical example is all about. So what are the options to run, so if you want to run a x86 code securely, what are the options? We have seen we can provide hardware protection or OS sandboxing. Okay, that is the first method that we have seen. Then so virtual machines and containers are the options. Then we have trust code developer like ActiveX and all, right, where we have a trusted third party who will check the code on our behalf, and we will execute the code only if it is signed by that trusted third party. Okay, and the third way we have seen is software fault isolation, whose job is to convert untrusted code into a trusted code or safe code. Okay, so hardware protection, we will run untrusted code as a regular user space as a separate VM, etc. So need to control what system call untrusted code invoke. So so when we are using Linux, we have a seccomp command which will allow only restrictive system calls to execute. Similarly, in FreeBSD, capsicum, through capsicum we can control the system call accesses. In Mac OS, it is seatbelt and things like that, right? So native client uses these techniques, but only as a backup plan. Okay, so native client first uses SFI technique to do the fault isolation and to provide the security, and these can be used as a backup plans if something went wrong there. Okay, so basically, why we don't want to rely only on operating system sandboxing directly, because as we have discussed, each operating system impose different or sometimes incompatible requirements, and it is not possible for us to always, have the application and make it compatible with the operating system. Okay, because system calls, if system calls need to be allocate memory, create threads, then again you have to take care what memory is accessed and things like that. Then virtual memory layout is a problem where fixed address shared library in Windows, in some cases variable addresses are used, etc. So to avoid all those incompatibility requirements, we generally avoid or not relying on operating system sandboxing directly. Then it may be possible that the OS kernel is vulnerable and there are some security flaws in that, right? And there is a way so that untrusted code can escape the sandbox. Not every OS might have a sufficient sandboxing mechanism. It is not necessary that all operating system will support the sandboxing environment. Also, hardware may have vulnerabilities, right? So author claims some instruction happen to hang up the hardware. Now, who will going to stop those instructions from executing? Okay, so that is the reason why hardware protection or OS sandboxing is not used much, and software fault isolation is the primary plan for native client. Okay, so given an x86 binary to run in native client, we will verify that it is safe. Okay, so verification involves checking each instruction in the binary. If the instruction is safe, we will allow it. Some instruction that might not be safe, so we will follow software fault isolation approach to and do all the checks before actually executing it. Must ensure the check is present at the verification time, or another option is insert the check through binary rewriting, right? So either if you remember, we have seen the first step where we will just compare. If it is within the range, we will allow, otherwise we will not allow. Or the second option is we will convert the code into a safe code. We will convert the untrusted code into safe code, right? So both are the ways. Yeah, but although it is hard to do at the binary level, but it is somehow more doable at higher level languages. So depending upon the granularity, native client decide which what to choose. Okay, and the instructions which are not at all safe, not at all I mean not converted to a safe code, are just prohibited. Okay, and once all the verification is done, we can safely run it in the same process as we are running it into the trusted code, because now we have converted the untrusted code into a safe code.